Hey everyone, today I'm going to be sharing my must-reads for 2025. These are going to be classics, they're going to be nonfiction, histories, biographies, they're going to be poems, plays, novels, a whole range of styles and genres. There's going to be some ancient texts, there's going to be medieval ones, modern, and contemporary. And yeah, I will probably film this over the course of several days, so it might not just be all in one sitting, just so you know. But let's get right into it. So first I have this incredible, thick, beautiful biography of Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson is one of the top biographers alive today, I would say. He's fantastic. This is a #1 New York Times bestseller. Isaacson has written all kinds of biographies on all kinds of interesting figures, from Elon Musk to Steve Jobs to Einstein to Benjamin Franklin. And I am interested in reading all of his biographies in time, but I figured Leonardo da Vinci would be a good place to start since I'm on an art kick this year and I want to learn more about art history and artists in history. And what comes to my mind when I think of Leonardo da Vinci are his paintings, his visual art, his artistic work. Of course, he was a Renaissance man, he was a jack of all trades, he was skilled in so many other fields, including science and engineering, etc. And it looks like this book gets into all of it. So, wow. This book is also full of fantastic illustrations that I think are going to be so helpful as I go through it. And yeah, this is going to be one of those books that I work on slowly, that when I sit down to read this biography, I'm taking notes. I'm really sitting with it and taking it all in. This is not a quick beach read by any means, but I'm really looking forward to digging into this one. Hello, I'm back. So I had to cut off the video yesterday because I ran out of storage space on my camera, and I took some time last night to reorganize this list so that when I present to you my TBR for 2025, it's a little more organized and and I can just get right into it and share all my books according to category. So the first category I have is history/biography/nonfiction. I have a personal development category, I have a novels of interest category, and then I have a medieval literature and an ancient literature category because I know for sure I will be reading these books because I will be teaching them. And then I also have a plays category and a Tolkien category. So I'm going to start with the history, biography, nonfiction category, and I've already shared with you my #1 book on this list, honestly, and the one that I will be reading soon because I already have it and I've begun reading it and it's fantastic. That is the Leonardo da Vinci biography by Walter Isaacson. I also would love to get my hands on his Benjamin Franklin biography, Benjamin Franklin: An American Life by Walter Isaacson. That one looks so good. Again, just geniuses. I'm so interested in them and fascinated by them, and I know a lot of people are. So I think it'll be fun to read some biographies of geniuses and share them with you guys on my channel. I also have The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank on here, which is pretty much her autobiography, her published diaries. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who fled from Germany and went into hiding in the Netherlands during the Second World War, and she lived in Het Achterhuis, which is like the behind house, so the hidden house. I forget the English phrase for it, but her and her family hid in this hidden part of a building in Amsterdam, I believe. Yeah, because the Anne Frank house today is in Amsterdam. And I really enjoyed listening to Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place, which was another autobiography of a Dutch woman's experiences during the German occupation of the Netherlands from 1940 to 1945. Anne Frank's diary is even more sober because we know that she died in a concentration camp towards the end of the war, and her father was the only one of her family that survived, and he came back and found her diaries, and she had always had a dream of being a published author, and so he published them, and since then she has become a voice for the young Jews whose lives were stolen from them during the Nazi regime. So I would like to read that one again. I don't have a copy in English. I do have a copy of Het Achterhuis in Dutch, but it would take me a few years to get through that probably because my Dutch is so rusty. Although that might be a fun exercise in brushing up on my Dutch. Ooh, I also have a biography on this list called Louisa May Alcott, The Woman Behind Little Women by Harriet Reisen, or Reisen. I love biographies of writers and artists that I look up to, and Louisa May Alcott is one of my favorite writers of all times, so I think this biography would be really, really interesting if I can get my hands on it. I did learn quite a bit about her life when I visited the Orchard House in Concord, Massachusetts, on my honeymoon actually, but it'd be nice to kind of refresh on her life and the life and love that went into writing Little Women. Ooh, Van Gogh Has a Broken Heart by Russ Ramsey. I just read Rembrandt is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey, which took a deep dive into, I believe it was 7 or 9 or 11 famous artists and their artwork. This one seems to be focused on Van Gogh and his life story. I don't know, Van Gogh is a fascinating character. Another Dutchman, one of the greatest artists of all time, arguably, and most famous. Most people can recognize Van Gogh's work, especially a piece like Starry Night or the Sunflower one. Yeah, just looking up the description of this book. The full title of the book is Van Gogh Has a Broken Heart, What Art Teaches Us About the Wonder and Struggle of Being Alive. So, beyond being a mere introduction to great art, this book is about loving to learn what art has to teach us about the wonder and struggle of being alive. And if you know anything about Van Gogh, he was, very disturbed, and so many geniuses were, so many great artists were. It looks like it's not just a biography of his life. We're also going to be looking at Pablo Picasso, Artemisia Gentilsky, Norman Rockwell, some other of history's most celebrated artists who suffered a lot and who put that suffering into their art. Yeah, I am really looking forward to this book. Oh, I have 2 history books by Tom Holland here. I love Tom Holland. I love the Rest is History podcast. I just find Tom a very bold and interesting figure who's very much just doing his own thing and coming to his own conclusions, and I think that's great. I really want to read Dominion by Tom Holland, which is about how Christianity has shaped the West and how the Western world that we know today is intrinsically Christian, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. Then there's also Millennium by Tom Holland, which I believe is just a history of the Middle Ages. I just think he's a great historian. I haven't actually read any of his books, but I love listening to him talk about history on his podcast, so I imagine his books will have that similar style and manner of communicating. I find it really helpful in understanding history better, so I'm looking forward to reading both of these. Oh, a book by Louisa May Alcott, which is Work, A Story of Experience. So I've actually never heard anything about this book. I happened to stumble upon it, never heard anyone talk about it or mention it. Essentially, it is a story about a 19th century woman's search for a meaningful life through work outside the family sphere. It's Alcott's exploration of her personal challenges and a social critique of America, 19th century America. So yeah, I don't know, I think this would be really interesting. Maybe this book should be in my novel category, but for some reason I thought it was autobiographical, and so I put it with the history books, but we'll see. Okay, and then there's one more book in my history nonfiction category, and that is The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance from 1917 to 2017. One of you recommended another book on Palestine to me, and then through researching that book, I found this book, and somehow just feel like this is maybe the place that I need to start brushing up on my history of Palestine. It's a landmark history of 100 years of war waged against the Palestinians from the foremost U.S. historian of the Middle East. It's told through pivotal events in family history. Yeah, it looks like it's a pretty nuanced and unbiased book. It says it's not a chronicle of victimization, nor does it whitewash the mistakes of Palestinian leaders or deny the emergence of national movements on both sides. In reevaluating the forces arrayed against the Palestinians, it offers an illuminating new view of a conflict that continues to this day. So yeah, I want to have a well-rounded understanding and perspective on this conflict. I don't want to be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. I want to have empathy for both sides and for all the people involved in this conflict. And yeah, that starts with just being knowledgeable and really looking into the history and forming an educated perspective, rather than just picking a side or having thoughts or opinions that aren't really based on actual history or based on narratives that I've heard or encountered or been told that I can't actually verify for myself. So yeah, I think this is a really difficult history to get into, but one that is very relevant and important in today's world. And so yeah, I think I should give this book a read and see where that leads. All right, for my personal development category, I have Contemplative Vision, A Guide to Christian Art and Prayer by Juliet Benner. I think one of you recommended this one to me as well, so it's on my list. I have yet to look into it. I also have Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, which you could maybe classify in my fiction or novels category, but it's more of an allegory of the Christian life, and I see it as an item towards personal development, terms of my spiritual life, spirituality. And then The Skole Way by Christopher Perrin. So if you watch my video on Skole, restful contemplative learning, invented or coined by the Greeks and was a huge element of classical learning throughout most of history, this book really dives deep into that and how to teach Skole in a school setting. Yeah, so just looking into this book a little bit more, I don't believe it's available on Amazon. It looks like it's just available on Classical Academic Press. Anyway, so the description here says, while much of modern education has become increasingly frenetic and stressful, the tradition of Skole offers another way, the Skole Way, which is a harmony of active and restful learning, of academic work and academic leisure. The classical tradition of education is oriented toward the full formation of a human soul rather than merely practical training for a job. This time-honored understanding of education provides space and occasion for wonder, contemplation, and conversation. Instead of merely covering material, it privileges pondering, savoring, lingering, and relishing as genuine student activity. So yeah, I just think this will be helpful for me as a classical teacher, a teacher of history and literature, in just learning how to teach my students better and how to give them this kind of Skole space in order to get the most out of their education. Okay, novels of interest, and there's a bunch on here that I don't know anything about, but that I came across and was like, ooh, that looks like it could be something for me. So I've added them to the list. So the first novel is Corinne, or Italy, by Madame de Stael, and there is an Oxford World Classic edition of this. I actually came across a reference to this book in like a dense academic history book where it was kind of celebrating this Corinne figure in this novel as kind of an early female historian, a female who knew a lot about the history of her country. Based on the description here, Corinne, or Italy, published in 1807. Okay, I'm going to call it Corinne, not Italy. Calling a novel Italy is kind of lame. So Corinne is both the story of a love affair between Oswald, Lord Nelvil, and a beautiful poetess, and an homage to the landscape, literature, and art of Italy. So yeah, it seems like this is at once a romance, a love affair that's deeply tied to the land of Italy and the landscapes of Italy. Sounds beautiful and also kind of informative. I'm fascinated by Italy. I love Italy, so I will always read a book set in Italy. I'm curious to see what this one's going to be all about. Next on my list is Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. I don't read enough of Tolstoy. I'm very much a Dostoevsky reader. Tolstoy, I have read War and Peace and Anna Karenina and The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I love The Death of Ivan Ilyich, but I've never read Resurrection. It was his last novel, and according to this description by Penguin Random House, it's an intimate psychological tale of guilt, anger, and forgiveness. Looks like it involves a murder trial, class conflict. Ooh, Tolstoy's most controversial novel, Resurrection, published in 1899, is a scathing indictment of injustice, corruption, and hypocrisy at all levels of society. Creates a vast panorama of Russian life. Okay, that sounds really interesting. I am looking forward to getting into this one. Okay, next up I have an American novel, The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I haven't read this before or anything by Henry James. Featuring the strong and spirited Isabel Archer, the embodiment of women's independence and strength. Okay, sounds good. Ooh, she journeys to Europe. I love that. Any story of an American going to Europe, I just really relate to because I'm a Canadian, but I've gone to Europe many times, and every time I go there, I think, why don't I live here? I'm so sad that my ancestors made the move across the Atlantic because I love Europe. I love what I see in Europe. I love what I hear in Europe. I just love the history and the cultural legacy of Europe. But alas, apparently during her journey, wooers vie for her attentions, including an English aristocrat, a perfect American gentleman, and a sensitive expatriate. But it is only after the ingenue falls prey to the schemes of an infinitely sophisticated older woman that her life takes on its true form. Okay. A little vague, and I don't really know what to expect, except probably some spicy romance and feminist rhetoric. I don't know. I'm interested to give this one a read and learn more. Then I'm looking at The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Another book that I feel like I should have read and should know something about, but I just don't. Apparently this is a Victorian novel. Ooh, it combines gothic horror, moonlit London, a beautiful woman, sinister intrigues, questions of identity and insanity, corridors of English country houses in the madhouse. Most influential of the Victorian genre that combined gothic horror with psychological realism. Okay. That sounds amazing. Ah, yes. That might be one of the first ones that I pick up because sounds fascinating. Okay. The next one, Summer by Edith Wharton. And I also have The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, which I think maybe I picked that one up in New York City with the intent to read it right away because I had my eye on it for a while, and I still haven't read it, and that was this summer. So to my shame, I haven't read any Edith Wharton, but I think it's time. Summer looks like the perfect book to read in like May or June when I'm just ready for summer to be here. Alright, here's the description from Goodreads. Summer by Edith Wharton. A naive girl from a humble background meets an ambitious city boy and a torrid romance ensues. Ooh, okay. Despite her pride, independence, and honesty, Charity Royal feels shadowed by her past, especially in her ardent relationship with the educated and refined Lucius Harney. Can passion overcome the effects of heredity and environment? Okay. Looks like it's about a woman's sexual awakening. Generally, I steer away from novels that are really sexual and it's all about sex and intimacy and relationships. But I mean, this was published in 1917. It says it caused a sensation, but I'm sure a sensation in 1917 due to treatment of this woman's kind of sexuality is nothing compared to some of the smut that's being published today. It is still a classic, hence I will still give it a read and not write it off. So yeah, that one should be interesting. Wow, it's got really sunny and bright all of a sudden. Okay, a few more novels by Louisa May Alcott. So, Jo's Boys and Good Wives. Oh dear. So I read Little Women a lot, basically every year, and I just read Little Men, and it was lovely. I just need to get my hands on a copy of Jo's Boys, which I believe is the continuation of Little Men, and then Good Wives being the continuation of Little Women. A Tangled Web by Ellen Montgomery. So this is, I think, her second adult novel. I just read The Blue Castle, which was fantastic. I loved it, and that's her first adult novel. A Tangled Web is about, I guess, a dark, sinister family history. And so yeah, I'd like to get my hands on that one. Also, Jane of Lantern Hill by Ellen Montgomery. I think those are the two books that I haven't read from her, and I'm trying to read all of her books. I read the whole Anne series and the whole Emily series recently. I've read Mistress Pat. I've read The Story Girl. I believe there might be a sequel to The Story Girl that I haven't read that I'll need to pick up. And then there's another one about a girl that starts with a K, Killarney something. I need to look more into this, but I guess there is still some more Montgomery that I haven't touched that I would like to put on my list and get into. Ooh, Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I think the last time I read this was grade 9 or 10. It was definitely one of those high school English class reads, and it was really interesting then, and I still love those stories kind of about primal boyhood and being stranded on an island and forming societies and just seeing the way people behave in those situations as kind of a look into human nature. I find that all very fascinating, and so I'd love to read Lord of the Flies again. And then finally, Fantastes by George MacDonald. I did read this last year, and I will be reading it with some of my students this year. It's very much kind of like a proto C.S. Lewis and Narnia type of fantasy or fairy story. I believe Lewis was highly influenced by MacDonald. He was one of the first writers in the 20th century, late 19th, early 20th, to kind of get back into fairy tales and fairy stories and kind of popularize those again and say, hey, we as adults can read this. We can enjoy fantasy and magic and these things. And so Fantastes is one of those, early fairy stories. Let me look it up for a sec. Yeah, it's a fairy romance, one of the first great works of 19th century fantasy fiction. It's inspired many of the great Christian and fantasy authors of the 20th century, looking at Lewis and Tolkien. It's a fairy tale for adults, the captivating story of a wealthy young man who takes an unplanned journey into a fantastic nether world. Led by an enchanting sprite, he meets a diverse cast of characters, among them a fairy queen, as well as sinister figures who threaten his spiritual well-being. I enjoyed it the first time, although I was a little confused by it at times, but I'm excited to give it a really good in-depth read. Second read, acknowledging that this is a book for adults and that it takes some thought and imagination, and I don't think I really gave it the time that it needed my first read through. Okay, my medieval literature category. We've got The Song of Roland by an unknown author. The Song of Roland is the oldest medieval French chivalric ballad, and it illuminates the chivalric values of the High Middle Ages. It is very historically inaccurate, but it's one of those exciting poems of chivalry and adventure and fighting and all that, I believe, between Christian and Muslim forces. I think this one will be really interesting, and I'm excited to read it and teach it. Then we've got The History of the Kings of Britain, which is a significant history of Britain, of course. And I believe it's like the earliest records or traces of King Arthur stories about Merlin. And it was written by Geoffrey of Monmouth around 1150. So I think this one will be really fascinating. I'm not as familiar with the Arthur, Camelot, Merlin stories as I want to be. Of course, I know sort of a little bit about them vaguely, broadly, just because how can you grow up and never hear of King Arthur? But I'm excited to actually get to the origins of the story and to see how they were present in history. I think that's going to be great. Then Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a knightly poem of Camelot that was actually lost for hundreds of years. And I believe that I have a copy of a translation by Tolkien, so that's great. Then I want to read The Divine Comedy by Dante. I'm teaching the Inferno, so the epic allegory of hell, but I want to read the whole thing for myself, hell, heaven, and purgatory. It's been a while since I've read this, so I'm looking forward to getting back into it, and I might do this as a read aloud with my husband. We're almost done-ish Paradise Lost by John Milton, and I think Dante is probably where we'll go next. Just really brings those epic poems to life, speaking them and working through them together. And then finally, The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, classic tale of a pilgrimage of strangers illuminating the various personages of the Middle Ages. Again, the last time I studied this in depth was in high school, and now I'm teaching high school. So yeah, I'm excited to reread this, to really dig into it, to teach it, to learn more about it alongside my students, to have great discussions about all these really interesting characters. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Looking now at my ancient history category. So right now, actually, I'm reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. It's a philosophical work that explores the nature of virtue and the path to achieving eudaimonia, in other words, happiness or felicity. It's Aristotle figuring out how can we as people live a flourishing and fulfilling life, and part of the way we can do this is through the cultivation of moral and intellectual virtues. Aristotle was adamant that human life has a telos, a purpose, an end goal. There is a reason that we're here, and because there is a reason, we need to be conscious of this final purpose and let that influence our decisions. We shouldn't just be going through life not really caring about our purpose or end goal and just making decisions based off of other factors. We should be living life purposefully with that end goal in mind. And the end goal that he kind of arrives at is eudaimonia. Yeah, I'm not going to give a full philosophical analysis of all of this, but I highly recommend that you give Aristotle a read, because there's nothing like reading Aristotle, and me talking about Aristotle is not as good as reading Aristotle for yourself. The next on my list is The War with Hannibal by Livy. So it's part of Livy's larger historical work, Ab Urbe Condita. Forgive my terrible Latin. It provides a detailed account of the Second Punic War, focusing on the strategies, battles, and key figures, especially the Carthaginian general Hannibal and his campaigns against Rome. Okay, maybe this one should have been in the history biography section, but because it's ancient, it's a famous piece of ancient literature, and I will be teaching it to my ancient history class, I put it in this category. Yeah, very thick book, very intense, very detailed. So that one will be a bit of a slog to work through, but I'm sure it will also be very rewarding. Also, Tacitus's Annals of Imperial Rome, which is a detailed historical narrative covering the Roman Empire's history from the reign of Tiberius to that of Nero, very much focusing on political events, imperial intrigue, and the moral decay of the ruling class. Should be fascinating. Yeah, the more I study ancient history and read ancient literature, especially Greek and Roman, this whole world is so fascinating, so interesting, and so a little bit far removed. And it can be intimidating to pick up books like The War with Hannibal or The Annals of Imperial Rome or any of these ancient texts, because they can be difficult to understand and interpret, and the world is so kind of foreign to us, and yet it's not. And the more you read into all of these things, the more you learn, the easier it becomes to build this world in your head and to comprehend it and to get a lot out of these ancient texts. So yeah, that's just my encouragement. If ancient history and literature is something that you would like to dabble in, but you don't even know where to start, or if you can do it, you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. It just takes time and thoughtfulness. Oh, this one is the one I'm most excited for, Ovid's Metamorphoses. So the Metamorphoses is an epic poem that weaves together a series of mythological and historical transformations. It explores themes of change, transformation, the nature of the divine. I'm not going to say much more, but this is probably the one I'm most excited for in this ancient literature category. And then finally, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. So Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic philosopher and a Roman emperor, and so this is his series of personal reflections and kind of philosophical musings that explore Stoic principles. So Aurelius is aiming to kind of guide his readers towards personal virtue and self-discipline and resilience in the face of life's challenges. Stoic philosophy, there's a lot of wisdom there. There's a lot that I, as a Christian, can get behind. This is definitely not one of the more challenging works of ancient philosophy, so yeah, I'm excited to read through this one again. Okay, we're getting near the end, I promise. Thank you for sticking with me if you're still here. So the plays category, I want to read as much Shakespeare as I can this year. I don't have enough Shakespeare in my life. Reading Shakespeare is actually a skill, I would say, and it's a skill that I want to develop and cultivate. If I'm going to be a teacher of literature and history, you gotta be able to read Shakespeare. So that's something that I always want to get better at. But there's 3 plays in particular that I know are going to be must-reads, and those are Macbeth, Henry V, and Antony and Cleopatra. I really enjoy Shakespeare's comedies. I think I probably prefer the comedies over the tragedies, and definitely over the histories. Although I do love the tragedy of Othello. I think these ones will be good, and Macbeth, of course, is one of the most famous, one of the classics, and so I'm very familiar with that. Henry V, not so much. I did study many of the history plays in university, but it's been a while, so I'm going to need a refresh on that. And Antony and Cleopatra, also a very well-known story, a well-known history. These should be great. I'm really looking forward to reading these. And then finally, my Tolkien category. If you've been following me for a while, you know that in 2024, I really got into Tolkien and have been trying to read through his whole Legendarium. Last year, I read The Hobbit, I read the Lord of the Rings series, I read Leaf by Niggle and On Fairy Stories, and I've been working through the Silmarillion for a while. So my goal this year is to get through the Silmarillion, to finish it, and maybe even to give it another read. I also know for sure that I will be rereading the Lord of the Rings series this year because I will be teaching it to my grade 8 class. I don't know if I'll get to reread The Hobbit this year. I think I prefer to try to tackle some works of his that I haven't read yet, like The Sons of Hurin or some of the Lost Tales, some of the shorter tales. I also have the most gorgeous edition of Tom Bombadil, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which are a series of poems by Tolkien, and oh, they look so good, about Bombadil and Goldberry's adventures. I think these would be some really fun poems to memorize. I think once springtime comes, I will probably start reading these aloud to Zach, and we'll both get a kick out of them because we love Tom Bombadil. Alright, so that is my list. That is my TBR list for 2025 so far. I didn't have a great list going yet at the end of 2024, so I am already a month into 2025 and I'm just sharing this, but that's because I'm just really sitting down to put it together. Thing is, I never follow lists very well because I just fly by the seat of my pants a bit and I'll encounter books that interest me just randomly throughout my days, and then I'm on that train. I'm getting that book and I'm diving into it. Not that I have forgotten about the other books that I had on my list to read. It'll just take me a little while to get to them now that I'm encountering new books, finding new books. So I'm very much just all over the place with my reading sometimes. Very spontaneous, I just go by my gut. If there's something that I really feel like reading, I'm gonna read it. Following a list through is not my strong suit. But I do think that I'm not going to lose interest in these books that are on my list, and that they will stay in the back of my head, and that I will get to them hopefully all this year in 2025, and if not, some other time. I can't see my way around it. This is a great list and I am so excited about it. Please do let me know if you've read any of these books and have any good things to say about them, or if you haven't but they're on your list as well. That would be fun if we would read them together this year. Yeah, let me know what you think, and as always, I love getting book recs from you guys and I love getting comments, and I try to respond to all of them, and I've gotten some great ideas from you guys and I really appreciate it. So please do like this video, please do comment if you have anything to share with me or anything to add to this discussion or anything that I should add to this list. And yeah, I just really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you again very soon.